A function is given by the equation y is equal to f of x, and there are 2 points on the graph of that function, points A and point B. Suppose the coordinates of A are x1 and y1, and the coordinates of B are x2, y2. You will remember, if you join point A to point B, you will get a straight line, and you can work out the gradient of the straight line using the gradient formula that we learned from analytical geometry. M is equal to y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. In this lesson, we want to look at average gradient, and there's nothing different really. It is just the same concept as the concept of gradient. We will be calculating the average gradient between any two given points on a particular given graph. First of all, let's look at some form of notation, like how do we calculate the value of y given the value of x. For example, f of x is equal to x squared minus 1. What is f of 0? Remember, what that means is that wherever there is x, we can now put 0 because now x is equal to 0. And so we substitute into that equation, and that will give us the value of y. In this case, we should get a negative 1. F of negative 1 tells us that x is now equal to negative 1. And so we're going to substitute negative 1 into that equation there and simplify our answer. So this is going to give us 0. You will notice what we now have is a point with coordinates at negative 1 and 0 for this one. For this one, that means when x is 0, then y is negative 1. So you do the same thing for f of x plus h. Now we're going to replace x with x plus h in that given function. So we go to x squared minus 1, and where there is x, we put x plus h, and all that, remember, is squared, minus 1. If there is need for you to simplify, you can then FOIL and remove those brackets. And now we need to get to this. In more general terms, suppose the function is given as y equals f of x. If you know the x coordinate, you can work out the y coordinate. But what I want us to take note of is, if the x coordinate is given as, say, x1, then it means the y coordinate will be found by replacing x with x1. In other words, we will look for f of x1. So f of x1 gives us the value of y. Suppose the x coordinate is x2. In other words, we know x. It is equal to x2. And we want to find y. What we need to do then is to take x2 and put it into our function of x. So the function will be f, or the value of y will be f of x2. So if this is a point here, let's call it A, and this is another point there, and let's call it B. Remember, we can join any two given points and get a straight line. We can then work out the gradient of AB. The gradient of AB in this case will be the same formula, y2 minus y1, but in this case it looks like f of x2, that is our y2, subtract y1, but y1 is f of x1, and all that is divided by x2 minus x1. This is exactly the same formula as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Let us have a look at this example. We are given f of x is equal to x squared minus 7x plus 6. You can sketch the graph if they require you to sketch the graph, and our graph would look like this. So this is the graph of our function f. It passes through those four given points A, B, C, and D. And the first question they say is determine the average gradient between A and C. Now, as you move between point A and point C along the graph, the gradient of the graph will keep on changing because this is a curve, it's not a straight line. So the gradient between A and C will keep on changing. If it were possible for you to work out gradient at each point, you could do that, but it is not possible to work out all the gradients. So average gradient means if it were possible to work out gradient at all the different points between A and C, and then you determine the average of those gradients. The average gradient between A and C is just defined as the gradient of the line joining points A and C. So we just need to look for the gradient of that line. That line is called a secant. We shall study more of seconds in grade 12. So let us answer this question. We want to know the gradient, the average gradient between point A and point C. Point A has coordinates at 0, 6, and point C has coordinates at 6, 0. So the average gradient is given by the gradient of the line joining point A and C, which in this case will be equal to 0 minus 6 divided by 6 minus 0. If you simplify that, you should get a negative 1. For B and D, point B is given as 1 and 0. These are the coordinates of point B, and the coordinates of D are 7 and 6. That is what we have in that diagram there. And so the average gradient is just equal to the gradient of the line BD, which is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And that should give you an answer of 1.